My friends, in the event that you are new to this wonderful card game and you have not yet signed up for a UGN Play account, you can now sign up with my exclusive referral code Alliteration and get yourself 50 bonus loyalty points for free. For free, as well as additional loyalty points for every event that you play in within my referral code period. Why do you need these, you might ask? Well, loyalty points can be used to redeem free promotional cards in the mail, as well as other exclusive items coming in the future. The bonus points from using my code are enough to redeem almost any promo card right off the bat, and having your UGN account is going to allow you to accrue and track more and more as you go through your hero or villain's journey. If free cards and progression all sound super appealing to you, the links for all of this are going to be in the description below. Now, let's get on to the video. Welcome, my friends, to another Alliteration gaming video. My name's Levi, and today we're going to talk about Nationals. Yes, this past weekend, the first and the only in-person national tournament took place in Dallas, Texas. And now that it's all said and done, we've got a lot to talk about. Namely, because the rest of the online Nationals are going to be on the way very, very shortly, starting this weekend and going forward. And if you are not already one of the lucky few who made it into the top 8 and already have your fancy schmancy golden ticket to Worlds, this is going to be your only opportunity remaining to get there. So it means you need as much prep as you possibly can. So today, that is what we're here to do. We're here to look at all of the data from this national tournament and conclude as much as we can possibly conclude and garner any further insight into the meta, how it's developing, how it's going to look going forward, and how you can either be the best of it or counter it. This video is going to be primarily split up into two segments. The first is going to be looking at the full character breakdown for the entire event and what the top 32 character breakdown was, and then looking at the top 8 deck lists, namely the deck lists that actually got their players tickets to Worlds. One more thing before we get into all of this data: if you have not seen my mini-series, The Good, the Bad, and the Aggro, is a 3-part video series detailing the 15 best decks that you will see at these national events, separating them into 3 categories, going over what makes them so strong. We concluded this series last week leading up to this event, and when I'm talking about the data throughout these charts, I am going to be referencing that series a lot, talking about what we got right, what we got wrong, and how things might change from it going forward. So if you haven't seen those videos yet, I highly recommend it. The playlist is on my channel, and I'll have a link in the description below. With that being said, it's time to get into some numbers. So the first thing I want to look at is the full character breakdown. There were 310 players in the room for Nationals, the biggest Universus event and the biggest MHA CCG event thus far. Absolutely amazing turnout, first of all. So let's see what characters those players decided to bring. First and foremost, it's absolutely impossible to ignore 49 Kirishima 2. This was very much prophesized as the best deck of the format, and is also one of the safest, most reliable, and most consistent, and most forgiving decks that anyone new or experienced can pilot. The deck has extremely high floors and extremely high ceilings, and overall was easily the strongest and safest pick to take to this event. So as crazy as it might sound that one character made up nearly a sixth of the entire event, he was clearly the strongest choice, and it's no surprise to see him come out in spades. The next guy rising above the rest of the characters is Tokoyami 1, coming in at 28 copies. This is also a pretty massive number, all things considered. If you weren't on the train that Kirishima 2 was the best deck, you were probably leaning towards Tokoyami as your next pick. I think most people fell in one of those camps. He was definitely prophesized as being up there next to Kirishima, or at least right under him, and it's no surprise that he came out so hard. Tokoyami is just the premier aggro deck. It is so fast, hits so hard, and it does unspeakable things before your opponent really gets a chance to stabilize or play the game in any fashion. Tokoyami is such a powerful aggro deck, arguably the best aggro deck, and it's no surprise that he came out and showed up so hard, especially when you have new formats, right? You have a new set coming out, everything's very undiscovered. The true like defensive mad scientist decks just simply haven't been figured out yet. Aggro is the way, and so if you're gonna go aggro, there was no reason not to go Tokoyami. So I wasn't at all surprised to see 28 of him here. Honestly, thought there would be a little bit more. From here on out, the rest of the pie chart is going to be at significantly smaller quantities than Kirishima and Tokoyami, so really solidifying those two as for sure the most popular decks of the format, and quite possibly the strongest as well. But coming in right under them, we have Ochako 2 at 16 players. This is also not super surprising. We talked a lot about Ochako 2 on this channel and how strong of an aggro deck she was. Very much doing similar things as Tokoyami, putting out very unreasonable numbers very early early on in the game, and quite frankly, just being able to really efficiently eat any 7-hander alive. Set 3 brought her so many new things, so it makes a lot of sense to see her up here as well. Another very similar character is Kyoka Jiro, coming in just right under her at 15 players. This is another deck that we talked about. Jiro is very strong, has never necessarily gotten weaker in any reasonable sense of the word, and while Set 3 didn't bring her a ton of new options, it did bring her the very cool card Season the Advantage, which, if you aren't aware, is probably the strongest standalone card in the meta right now, and very much influenced the results of this entire event, and is seen in almost every single deck in the top cuts. Continuing on the aggro train, we're looking at 13 copies of Ochako 1. Also a very reasonable pick. This is a character that's always been hardcore loved by people. She's one of the more stable and consistent sides of the aggro decks. She has a lot of safety plans and kind of like toolbox options than some of the other aggro decks have, but she is very weak to certain key pieces like Faith Shields or Cheerful Uppercuts, making it a lot harder for her to play her game untethered. That's the primary reason she fell off in Season 2, and if you thought Faith Shield decks were going to be less prevalent in Set 3, that simply isn't quite the case, as Earth Kirishima has easily proven to be the most popular deck in the meta right now, and those guys are running around with Faith Shields everywhere. So while Ochako might have showed up as much as those other aggro decks, she didn't necessarily convert as hard, but we'll get to that later. Another aggro deck coming in at 13 players exact is Ojiro 2. Ojiro 2 is one of the strongest standalone new character cards coming out of Set 3, and he's a very fast and powerful aggro deck, so it makes sense to see him here as well. He's one that's been hyped up a whole lot by the community. Everyone's been talking about this guy, so honestly, I expected to see this guy at even more players, but it seems that a lot of aggro players pivoted towards the more, I'd say, explosive options with things like Ochako 2 and Tokoyami. Those characters have much higher ceilings, whereas Ojiro is a little bit more stable. You know, he can 99% of the time he can get his 3 attacks, turn it into his 4th attack, but he also doesn't have like that many ways to cheat things like progressive, re-ready his foundations. You know, he doesn't have necessarily a lot of the staple things that come with aggro in this game, but he is really good at putting out a few big attacks every single turn and just doing that very consistently. So I actually view him very similarly as I do Ochako 1. He's kind of that more grounded style of aggro. Now for this next guy, we're going to finally divert from the aggro train a little, and we're going to look at 12 players taking Eraserhead 1. This is about exactly the number I expected to see Eraserhead 1 at. He is a very good character, and if you play him perfectly all day, he's probably the strongest character in the entire game. However, that is a really massive feat to ask of anyone, even some of the best Eraser players in the game. Quite frankly, he's a deck that I only really expected to see the best Eraserhead players in the game taking. I've been calling Eraserhead 1 the best rogue deck of this format, and I think his numbers here support that statement a lot, even if his conversion rate necessarily doesn't. Then right under him we have Moneta 2. This is probably, if Eraserhead is not the best rogue deck in the game, I think this is probably the next best rogue deck in the game. Moneta 2 is really strong. He didn't really get a crazy amount of things from Set 3, but the main thing that Set 3 did is it pushed Momo a little bit out of the meta. She's still very strong, but not necessarily the dominator of the format that she was before, which is really important for Moneta because that's almost an auto-lose matchup. I know some of the best Moneta players in the game, and they'll tell you, yeah, it's pretty darn unwinnable for that character to fight through that matchup. As skill-intensive as it can be, she is just such a hard counter to him. But now that she's fallen off a tad bit, Moneta can really start to shine, especially when it comes to taking on the 2 big dominators of the format within Kirishima 2 and Tokoyami. I think Moneta matches up into those guys fairly well. Next, we have probably the biggest dark horse of the event, the super unexpected rogue deck that came out of nowhere. That's Bakugo 1. Now, it's no secret that since Heroes Clash dropped, a lot of people have been loving playing things like Stun Grenade with Bakugo 1, implementing it into double front beatdown decks and doing all kinds of crazy, super powerful stuff with it. I personally, though, never would have considered it Nationals material, but it looks like 11 people disagree with me, and they did bring Bakugo 1 to some pretty stellar numbers in this event. He did not find a very powerful conversion rate into the top cuts, but I do think this deck is pretty strong, it's pretty slept on, and with some more tinkering and with a little less checking of the ones in their decks, I could see some Bakugo 1 players making those top cuts. Next, we got Midnight coming in at 10 players. This is also not super unexpected. Definitely one of the more standout rogue decks of the format. Midnight has a lot of really good tools to fight the meta right now, and some very dedicated players behind her as well. People really like Midnight. They like what she does. They like what she offers as counters to some of the really good decks. Somnambulism, just letting you commit your rival's character, is obviously so strong against a huge portion of the field. It's good against almost every single character in their pie chart. The full kit that the character was granted within set 3 really offers her a lot more options and hard-hitting angles to come at your opponent from. So I'm really glad to see Midnight showed up at this event. Then coming in under her is 8 copies of Tsuyu Asui 1. This is another super duper strong deck, one of the really good aggro decks, but that offers a lot more stability and reliability and also defensive options when it comes to entering those late game scenarios. Asui, even after losing a lot of her best cards, kind of like sniped out the Railgun Asuis and the Master Asia Asui lists that were running around. Those Life Asui decks not super prevalent anymore. However, that doesn't mean Asui is dead, it just means she goes back to her set 1 style, where she plays a really solid and well-rounded game plan under the water symbol, utilizing the best of its defenses and her own defensive versatilities to survive late game scenarios. And then also, if she happens to just draw every attack in her deck on turn 2, probably has the ability to play them all as well and just blow you out at a moment's notice. The frog is not dead in the slightest, and I think the 8 players here that brought her confidently will attest to that. Then finally, the last notable numbered character is Toru 2. Toru 2 is another deck that we talked a ton about. She's very powerful, she's very good against the top dogs of the meta, providing a lot of crazy defensive utility against things like Tokoyami and Ochako, as well as supporting a really solid and stable aggressive plan against a lot of the decks that like to go more late game against her. I think Toru 2 is extremely well rounded and a very powerful character. Makes total sense to see her up here in the big boy copies. And so that's the total pie chart for the global character representation amongst the 310 players. We have 12 decks right here, none of which I'm really surprised to see. Notably enough, 9 of these 12 decks are decks that we talked about on the good, the bad, and the aggro. So a lot of our predictions and premonitions there very much coming to light. The only real one that didn't show up as much that I expected to see a lot of was Recovery Girl. Like the 10 Midnights, I expected to be more so Recovery Girl, and I expected to see like 3, 4, or 5 Midnights. Recovery Girl was the 5th deck that I opted to talk about in the Rogue category over Midnight. We did give her a special shout out though, because I did expect to see some amount of Midnights here, but definitely a lot more than I expected. And then the Bakugo was very unexpected. A lot of things are within our expectations here, especially the big numbers of Kirishima and Tokoyami. I got to peruse the event a whole lot between breaks during the stream, and I got to get a look at what a lot of players were playing, especially some of the bigger names in the community. And it was very jarring to see big names in the community who are known for certain decks opting to pivot towards the Kirishima and Tokoyami. Daniel Nelson, known for Eraserhead, was playing Kirishima 2. Chris Smith, known for his All Might 3, was playing Kirishima 2. Barrett Bryant, known for Eraserhead, was playing Tokoyami. And there's many more there who pivoted as well. But the big thing to take away here is these characters are so much more powerful than the rest of the field that even really strong players in the community who are so well versed and so apt at piloting one specific deck are opting to pivot towards these two and play them instead. And I think that just really speaks to the power level of those two characters. So that's just a quick thing I wanted to point out. It really stuck out to me during the event, and I think it's very much worth noting. Now, looking at the top 32, I have them broken down by character / symbol here, and let's get right into it. First of all, between 16 people playing Kirishima 2, he makes up exactly half of the top 32 bracket. 15 on the earth symbol, 1 on the fire symbol, and that is just crazy. Obviously, with that many people piloting him, he's gonna have a pretty big conversion rate into the finals, but going from about a 1/6 of the room to half of the top 32 is a really big jump, and once again, just speaks to the insane power level of this character. This guy is so strong, and when a lot of the best players in the room opt to take him, yeah, I mean, it's just a recipe for success. I think the real jarring thing about this list as well is that after him being 16 of the 32 spots, everyone else is either 2 or 1, which is just an absolutely, like, to say this guy is that much better than the rest of the field, that there's that many more of him over the other characters is just crazy. I mean, 8 times more than any other character on the chart is just an insane conversion rate. Now, speaking of those other characters, we have 2 Air Jiros, we have 2 Tokoyami 1s, we have 2 Asui 1s, 2 Death Ochako 2s, 2 Water Mineta 2s, technically 2 Momos, 1 being life and 1 being good, and we have a few 1-ofs in Ojiro 2, 1 Midnight, 1 Kamui Woods, and 1 Ochako 1. So the top 32 is made up of almost exclusively characters that were widely represented that were widely represented in the pie chart. The only real outlier here being one Conway Woods. Of course, that's Jose, right? But everyone else in this top 32 was largely represented in the tournament. All these 2-ofs and all these 1-ofs make a ton of sense. I think this top 32 pretty much represents the entirety of the meta. So I feel like a few rogue decks like the aforementioned Recovery Girl, maybe some stuff like Sero 1 or Shigaraki 1. The other guy who's prominent in our pie chart but also didn't find his way into the top 32 is Eraserhead. Now, I don't think that makes Eraserhead bad by any means. The main thing to take into account here is, once again, one of the hardest decks, if not the hardest deck to play in the game. Very strong when piloted perfectly, but very bad when piloted poorly. And frankly put, the 3 best Eraserhead players were in that room, and only one of them was actually playing Eraserhead. Daniel Nelson and Barrett Bryant both pivoted other ways for this tournament, and then Corey Aguilar stuck with Eraserhead. And from what I understand, Corey was in a win-and-in match scenario and was simply 1 5-check away from securing that spot. So I don't think it brings any shame to the character per se. He's just very difficult to pilot, and the main people most likely to be able to pilot this character towards a top cut spot in this event either weren't playing him or were just a little unlucky. I also think it's surprising that there's no Toru 2 in the top cuts. Bakugo makes sense. That character's always been pretty widely represented, but never had a very strong conversion rate. Toru 2, however, though, I think is a really powerful deck, and I'm a little bit shocked to see it not in here. So that's going to conclude this section of the video. A lot of really interesting things going on here, but also a lot of really expected things going on here as well, from the whole pie chart to the top 32 itself. So let's go on to the next level, and that's going to be the top 8 deck lists. So we're going to hit these from the ground running, starting from 8th and going all the way up to 1st. And the first noteworthy thing here is we have some incredibly gorgeous design layouts made for the top 8 deck lists here. I really love that Jaska went the extra mile to put these out like that. This is so gorgeous. I love staring at this way more than I like staring at a UVS Ultra screen. No offense to UVS Ultra, you guys are doing the Lord's work over there. But this is gorgeous and very much makes it feel worthy of like the Nationals top 8 deck lists. So we're going to start off with Keenan Meadows' top 8 water Asui deck list. This is very, very, very tried and true water, aggro, and defense all in one package. The water symbol is so flexible and so strong. There are a couple noteworthy things here. The recovery times in the main deck is very interesting. I have to imagine this was kind of a bit of a meta call towards a lot of the discard decks running around. So, and I mean, when you're not against those decks, it is just like a free block essentially. So I can't harp on maining those and citing 2 more as well. Maining 3+ Ultra, also pretty scary. In a deck with 4 tape, it does make a lot of sense, but it's still something interesting to note. We also have a ton of 3 diffs in this deck. Prone to Dry Eyes is another really powerful 3 diff the water symbol picked up. Kind of a bit of a staple, honestly, even when you already have things like Rescue Completed and Sticky Balls. So we're seeing all of those represented here. The rest of the foundations are pretty standard water stuff. We've got the Ice Glidings, we've got the tapes, we've got the Stronghold Studies. 3 Frozen is a lot, but it makes sense. Keenan's always been a big proprietor of this card, and it really helps you set up those massive late game kill turns. We see Asui picking up things like 4 Exhausted Exclamation into the main deck, one of the most powerful pieces of kit she got from the Eraserhead starter deck. And then the attacks are just a standard ranged package. We see the 4 Tongue Smacks coming back in, seeing a lot of great success as a cantrip, as a big damage move, just a nice 4 diff attack doing all the things that Asui wants to do. Only 2 Heat Waves and 1 Cannon is a pretty interesting assortment there. The Faith Shields exclusively in the sideboard are a little interesting, but I don't think that combo decks are really as prevalent these days, and neither are throw decks, so they're not nearly as essential as they used to be. The extra Prone to Dry Eyes probably comes in against the stun decks, the extra recovery times against the discard decks, and of course the stadiums for decks that really love their Breaker 2 blocks or their own Faith Shields. A very solid list from Keenan. He got to be on stream a couple times throughout the event, and commentating his games was an absolute blast. He played this deck like an absolute monster, and it was a pleasure to see him top. Next up, we've got Chris Smith, Universe's dad right here, pivoting from his All Might 3 and going on to Kirishima 2, playing a very interesting Kirishima 2 list actually. So for the Kirishima list, there's been a lot of things between going for like the full punch builds on Earth or the full kick builds, or a bit of a hybrid, and that's kind of what we're seeing here. So we kind of have some kicks between things like the Hardened Frenzy and the high engine kicks, but nothing that actually synergizes directly with kicks itself, like some of the builds are playing things like Recipro Extend or Acceleration Kick. This one's just kind of playing a really solid widespread attack package, ignoring the attributes. We've got the Hardened Uppercuts in here. This has been a really cool tech seen by a lot of these decks. It's a very hard hitting move and also offers block utility as well with speed reduction, not something the Earth symbol has a ton of. We've got the the Season the Advantages, the one of Petty Squabble. This is also a tech that a lot of these Kirishima decks have been utilizing. The Talented Bakers for some speed. The Prehensile Tail was another interesting tech that a lot of the Kirishimas at Nats were using. It offers really good deadlock utility and the ability to recycle certain cards. We have a staple Earth Foundation base. The Chivalrous Competitor is one of the strongest new additions. We've got some Apathetics. We've got the mainly passionate guys. And then in the sideboard, we have 2 Faith Shield in here. Again, none main decks, just like Keen, and then even less in the sideboard. And then we have the Learning the Standards here as well. Another really powerful piece against things like Tokoyami and Ochako too. And it has nice utility to essentially like remove their bonus checks. I think Learning the Standards is a very, very powerful card in the format right now. So that's Chris Smith's list, a very, very cut and dry Kirishima 2 list that's going to aim to just punch you really hard and really efficiently. Next, we're going to go into Deshaun Fulbright's Kirishima 2 list. This is another Earth list that took some interesting liberties. Deshaun is actually a buddy of mine. I know him from the Houston group. It was awesome to see him come in and take down a top 8 spot, securing his ticket to Worlds. We're seeing some interesting things in his build. The most notable thing is the zeros in here. Holy cow, this guy's got 15 zeros in his deck. He loves these internships with Best Genius and these quick to acts. This is really cool to see. I like this a lot. Makes your opening builds a lot more consistent and efficient. Makes a build 4 or an even build 5 turn 1 really likely. We see the 4 Apathetics, also kind of interesting here. Really heavy on the Apathetics. I love Apathetic. I think it's a very, very powerful card. Makes sense to see 4 of it here from my perspective. 3-1 with Natures. This is something that was actually absent entirely from Chris Smith's build, which is very interesting. I think 1 with Nature is one of the strongest cards in the meta right now. It's a very, very, very powerful foundation that just increases your early game aggro ceiling so hard. And I'm shocked that Chris didn't run it, but not shocked that Deshaun opted to put copies in his deck. Going for the attacks, things are also pretty standard here, save for a couple copies of the hardened barrages. No rapid punches in here, but even the barrages themselves just offer some nice utility with getting to unflip a lot of your powerful flip foundations, and the couple uppercuts also make sense. Only 2 Season the Advantage. I wonder if he just didn't have more. I feel like at least 3, probably even 4 are pretty staple in these builds. Then also we've got 2 copies of Brute Strength as well. Interesting piece to help you dance around deadlock. Kind of occupies that tech slot that something like Talented Baker or Prehensile Tail might otherwise. And then the sideboard is just Forcing Surrenders for Tokoyami. You're So Obvious for the big decks, Faith Shield for those combo decks, and then Learning the Standards for the Tokoyamis and the Ochakos of the world. So some pretty interesting differences here, but otherwise looking to do the same thing, just punch the heck out of the opponent very, very efficiently. Pivoting from the Kirishima train, we're going to look at Clinton Thomas's Air Giro list. This is one of 2 Air Giros that made it all the way to the top. The foundation base is very similar to what Giro's been doing in the past. We've got some tech slots coming in from things like Cool and Tough and Successful Results. The basic trainings, one of the strongest new additions to the Zero lineup for Air. Season the Advantage, an extremely powerful card in the meta right now, and has even more utilization with Giro being able to take extra advantage of it as a card in the card pool when she's playing Air Attack. Really, I think one of the biggest reasons that Air Giro has been able to come back so strong in this Nationals is having access to this card. Another big shift that's come from the Air Giro list, and we see Tim Keefe adopt it too, is the introduction of Pillar Swing into these decks. Pillar Swing is pretty much the unwavering slash replacement. It is a charge and a weapon and a +2 low block. All stat lines that Unwavering Slash was occupying before. Obviously Unwavering being a very, very different card in the deck out overall, but it makes sense that this comes in as a replacement just for the sheer numbers of it, and it also allows you to make some pretty busted specialized Soundwaves plays early on in the game if they do full block your Pillar Swings. And then in the sideboard, we just see some more defensive tech with all 4+ Ultras, amusingly enough, and then also Infinite Potentials is interesting here as well. I have to imagine this is primarily due to this deck only having, I think, 14 low blocks in it, so if the opponent was overloading on certain zones that we weren't able to block as efficiently, makes sense that these would come in right here. Next, we're going to go into the top 4 of the event. Back into the Kirishima train here, we have someone Top Cuts is not unfamiliar with in the slightest, and that's Travis Tangeman. Once again, pivoting towards Kirishima 2 as one of the stronger decks of the format. We're seeing a nice spread of zeros from Travis's foundations. Shock Absorption is an interesting tech that I don't think the others were utilizing. Heavy on the Apathetics, heavy on the one with Natures, the Petty Squabble, and the Prehensile Tails are tech slots. And then, of course, the 3 Seasoning Advantage. The attacks, the big notable thing here is, of course, we're playing the Hardened Barrages and the Rapid Punches, opting to include both of these in our lineup over things like Texas Smash for a lot of synergy between our strings, and then also 2 copies of British Swag Swagger as a tech attack slot as well. And then our sideboard just looks very, very similar, learning the standards and faith shields as our answers to things. Overall, a very solid and impressive Kirishima list from Travis. No surprise as to why he made it all the way to the top 4 with this list, Travis being a standout player and Kirishima being a standout deck. Speaking of standout players, we'll continue into the top 4 and look at Kevin Broberg's Life Momo list. So of course, Momo being one of those decks that a lot of people thought was going to kind of fall off, and she definitely did numbers wise. She really didn't put it out this Nationals compared to other events in the past format. But here we've got none other than Kevin Broberg still trucking along with this character, and not too many crazy things happening here. We've seen some Momos doing some interesting techs with things in set 3, like the Friends with Animals and the Command Pigeon Flocks, letting you build in stuff like your study group leaders. We're not really seeing any of that here. This is a pretty much almost entirely set 2 Momo list. In fact, the only Heroes Clash cards that actually made their way into this list is within the asset lineup. We've got 2 copies of the Training Weights, and we've got 1 copy of Special Edition Collectible. So some really, really cool tech there. Otherwise, this is just Life Momo, a very, very tried, true, solved, and proven powerful deck. Even in our new format where she didn't get a ton of new tools to work with, Momo is still able to cut it with the best of them. Getting into the nitty gritty, our top 2 lists right here, we have Tim Keefe, the other prince of Rochester CCG, piloting another Air Giro deck. This one with some really, really, really cool tech going on. The foundation base looks very similar as to the Air Giros in the past. We are seeing some more tech like Shock Treatment and Wealthy Aspirations, and some very interesting tech here with the Dexterous Appendages. This is actually a really, really, really heads up play here to counter things like Chivalrous Competitor in the meta, since after they make us draw, we actually get to stack our next check. This is a really, really, really cool include. After that, we just have our 4, of course, Season the Advantage. We have 1 Earphone Jack, the other Giro list opting not to play any assets just because Unwavering isn't here anymore. I think 1 of Earphone Jack is still totally something you can get away with, though. We're maxing out on the Sound Wave, living and dying by the 2 check as we saw on stream. And then we see a much more teched out attack lineup. We've got 2 copies of the Flash Attack here. We've got 1 1.3, 1 Grav Lift, 1 Pillar Swing, a very teched out attack lineup. We saw the Pillar Swing come up a lot in the stream games, had some very, 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 very cool plays that had us on the edge of our seats. And then in the sideboard, we just have a lot of really cool tech. The Training Partners help us counter big speed decks. The Cheerleaders are super good to flash enemy moves and even flash our own moves if we don't want the opponent interacting with them. We've got the Singular plus Ultra in here. More flash attacks, really, really good against stuff like Tokoyami and Kirishima. We've got some more 1.3s if we just can kind of catch decks that aren't super heavy on their lows. A 1 of Airstream Driver for the inverse reason with highs. And then we have Toru 2 in our sideboard. This is Toru 2's sneaky appearance, very on brand, sneaking her way into the top cuts here in Tim Keefe's sideboard. It's in there to fight Tokoyami, but I have to imagine it came out against some of those other rogue aggro decks where it has a lot of application, such as Ochako 2 and Ojiro 2. A fantastic return to fame for Air Giro as a deck, piloted by one of the best in the biz, Tim Keefe. Congrats to your performance with this deck, man. And then, of course, at the end of it all, in our number 1 spot, we have your national champion, Barrett Bryant, piloting a Chaos Tokoyami list. Now, I know that this is a list that he and Tamron Cardwell worked on really, really extensively together for the last couple months. This is actually almost the exact list that Tam was going to play in the event before he got signed on to cast. I want to say he told me his list was 4 cards different, I believe. So this is kind of like their baby they put together, and it really, really shows because he was able to take down the entire event with it. Looking at the foundation bases, the first thing you're going to notice is 14 zeros. This dude's got 1,000,000 0 difficulty foundations in his deck, and this is something that both he and Tam really told me when it came down to playing Chaos over Fire, is the power of the 0 difficulty foundations. There are so many high impact 0 difficulty foundations under the Chaos symbol, and you get to just jam them all non-stop. They're really easy to build at the end of long strings. It makes a build 4 or 5 really, really, really likely on your first turn, which leads to your turn 2 OTKs becoming even more likely to do. Otherwise, we have some pretty standard stuff. Struggling as a good defensive tech. The Feeling Cute is a nice speed pump, is pretty interesting. The Chivalrous Competitors, of course, one of the most standout cards in the meta right now to counter things like Season the Advantage. And then just a lot of really nice tech. The League Interviews, the Frozens, the Training Partners. Big on the One with Nature's, of course, one of the strongest cards in the game right now. The Petty Squabbles to help filter for our kill turns. And then, of course, our beautiful, beautiful ranged attack lineup. Things like Twisting Azure coming in only at 2 copies, interestingly enough, but still one of the strongest additions to Tokoyami's kit. The Frozen Slash is another big reason to play Chaos over Fire right now. It is like the one strong attack that you don't get under Fire, that you do get under Chaos. This thing just makes Tokoyami even more of a stats monster than he already is. 1.3 is a massive bomb. And then we just have, of course, our really staple cards between the Crow and Frogs and the Ruins, our bombs and our setups with the heat waves and the ice walls. Very, very fantastic stuff here. And then just a nice teched out sideboard with some extra copies of a lot of our tech pieces, more Ice Storms to break her up those really turn to aggro decks, plus Ultras to save our bacon in big bomb matchups, and then Evil versus Good, I have to imagine, is here to stop like certain response decks. It does stop Face Shield. That is a really interesting application of Evil versus Good in this format right now. And so, my friends, that is the full recap and meta breakdown of the first ever Pro Hero National Tournament in Dallas, Texas that took place this last weekend. Tons of interesting things. Definitely proved a lot of the community's theories about Kirishima and Tokugami being the big top 2 dogs of this format, and they're really the #1 things you should be prepared to play against if you're trying to hit up one of these upcoming national tournaments and get that last minute chance to secure a ticket to Worlds. These are the 2 decks to be aware of, but we can definitely see that there is a whole lot of other decks in the format that you should be privy to and are ready to fight. If you made it all the way to the end of this video, first of all, thank you so much. I really appreciate that, and you should totally leave me some feedback down below. Second of all, if you made it all the way to the end of this video and you still aren't satisfied, you want more meta knowledge, more things to prepare for so you can crush these upcoming national events. I mentioned it earlier, but once again, I did a whole mini series, The Good, the Bad, and the Aggro, talking about what I think were going to be the 15 best decks at nationals. And now that we've got the first national event under our belts, a lot of that information has held true. So if you have not checked those videos out, you absolutely should. They're going to be a fantastic study course for the rest of the Pro Hero Nationals. And while you're there, I've also got a ton of other MHA CCG content all over this channel. We do gameplay videos, we do deck profiles, we do tier lists, we do big fat meta discussions like these in order to dish out a ton of information that your brain can soak up, leading you to absolutely conquer all of these big events. So if all of that sounds fantastic, you should totally hit the subscribe button so I can jam all of that straight down your newsfeed. With that all being said though, guys, that's all the time I've got for today. I truly hope that I see you in the next video, but for now, this has been Levi signing off.